A little
I make you look a little taller is what I need to do. Talk for a second. Talk for a second.
puff or talk.
Talk.
Talk?
You don't need to puff. It's okay. You're recording. Move your hand. There you go. Okay. Wednesday, February 7th. This is my father. What's your name?
Augie DeLeo.
Oh, 2018. So, Augie DeLeo, let's start. I'm trying to find out some things that I don't know about you. So let's start with your earliest memories. Who was
My
your
earliest memory?
Well, let's start with do you know who your grandparents were?
I'm sorry.
Do you know who your grandparents were?
Yes. You want me to name them?
Yeah.
On my mother's side, it was Liborio Solaco was her father, and her birth mother was Rose Camarada, who died when she was very young. My grandfather remarried, and her name was Jenny. On my father's side, my grandfather was Arcuso de Leo from Sciacca, Sicily, and my grandmother, my father's mother, was Olympia Ladara from Palermo in Sicily. I forgot to mention my mother's father, Liborio, also comes from Sicily. He comes from Trapani by Alcamo in the mountains.
Hang on a second. I think it stopped.
So every morning we'd go to the shack and look at the board and see who was assigned where, and little by little the crowd was getting smaller. And sometime early in December of 1956, I went to the shack and I caught my name, and it said, assignment, USS Curtis, destination, Antarctica.
Oh.
I thought, oh, holy Jesus, what did I do to deserve this, you know?
Join the Navy, see the world.
What was that?
So join the Navy, see the world.
See the world, man. So, I can't believe it, but I had no choice. So, I go aboard and immediately find like-minded friends. And so we, you form your little cliques, And these were guys from St. Louis and Chicago and Kansas City and little towns along the West Coast, north of Los Angeles, almost north of Santa Barbara. Not Lompoc.
Solvang?
Wait a minute. Santa
Maria.
Santa Maria.
Yeah.
Right. Santa Maria. That's where one of the guys came from. Mexican guy. And we formed a group, a singing group, rhythm and blues. And we would perform, Anyway, so we leave land, and one morning I wake up, 5 o'clock in the morning. We form a detail, scrub down the decks, this, that, and the other. Go for breakfast, come out. Now, what's our assignment? Got to chip paint. You're on a ship. You got to chip the paint. Before you paint it, you got to chip it. So, but we're up on the bow, and we're chipping paint. I'm looking around, and I'm saying to myself, it was a beautiful day. In every direction, there was no land. We're in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, And I said, this really wouldn't be bad if we didn't have to work, That was fine until we hit bad weather. Forget about that. And it was true. So and we would get semi-drunk on whatever you could do, cough medicine, and APCs, which were like all-purpose pills. We'd take a few of those, drink some cough medicine, and before you knew it, you had shipboard booze. And our first port of call, we were we were transporting scientists and personnel and supplies for our base at McMurdo Sound, which is a research station as well as being a naval station. And this was for the International Geophysical Year, so the scientists were part of that whole armada of scientists that were moving all over the world geophysically, and they were doing their stint in Antarctica over the winter, which is 12 months of darkness, which you don't need. In any event, so that's what we were taking there. And these guys were weird. These guys were really very weird people. They were definitely scientists. One guy would come out in almost a flowing robe every day. And nobody dared stop him or talk to him or touch him, right? And he'd go and he'd sit somewhere where he could see the bow, and he'd assume the lotus position, and he'd stay like that all day long. I couldn't believe it. It was, and we all used to, watch out for this guy. Anyway, our first port of call was Port Littleton, Christchurch, Port Littleton, New Zealand. The reason I put those together is that I forget which is which, but they're so close that that was our first port of call. And we were just bowled over by the New Zealanders, and they're just wonderful people. They and subsequently the Australians. And New Zealand then, in 1956, 57, now it's 57 we got down there. Took us a long time to get all down there. And it was like the United States must have been at the turn of the 20th century. That's the way the housing was and so on. Not only there, but subsequently in Australia too. I'll get to that. But they were that far behind America at that point. Now they far surpassed us in many ways. But anyway, that was the first stopover before we headed down to McMurdo, because now remember, we have a reversal of the seasons. This is now January of the year, and down there it's summer.
Right.
Whereas, in the northern hemisphere, it's winter. So the ice melted enough for us to get close enough to McMurdo Sound, because ordinarily you just can't get anywhere close to it because it's iced in. Well, anyway, even so, at that time of the year, with the ice breaking up, we had an icebreaker in front of us the whole time. I think it was the West Wind. I think that was the name of it. And every day, they would lift off a helicopter from their aft flight deck and fly over we had a makeshift flight deck on our bow. And this was an old converted seaplane tender. And ordinarily they took care of the seaplanes back aft, where you had a huge teak deck, huge. It was as big as a hangar. But we had a landing pad for a helicopter on the bow. And they would fly over to our bow, land on our bow, and deliver our mail and other supplies that they had for us. And on the 21st trip, 21 trips that we're making, we're in a very calm sea, and there's ice around us. And the breaker is, maybe a mile ahead or so. But we had big swells that day. It was calm. It was glassy like that, but there was movement. This kind of movement. Mm-hmm. And after the 21st trip, the helicopter took off above our flight deck and hovered. And because of the movement of the swells, our bow came up and clipped them and they crashed, landed in the water.
Wow.
Well, during the entire trip from the United States, almost every night we had a man overboard drill. Almost every night. And we all knew what we had to do in the man overboard drill. And almost every night, the dummy died. The dummy died. Yeah. Well, anyway, so I'm on the port side of the superstructure, and I'm supposed to be in the lifeboat. So immediately, what happens when that happens? The shipboard reaction is dead stop. Blow the horn signal, and it's a big horn signal. And while all of that is happening, a boat is in the water. So this happened so quickly that I hear because the helicopter didn't make any big crash landing sound or anything like that.
Right.
And I immediately start to run around the superstructure to get to my lifeboat station. And as I turned the front to see the starboard side of the ship, the lifeboat was in the water on the way to the orange tail of the helicopter that was sticking up, and the two pilots were in the water. So, and we pulled them out. Everything was cool. Can you believe that? They lived after we killed all those goddamn dummies. But that's how quickly everybody reacted. By the time I just ran around the superstructure and to get to my station, the boat was in the water and on the way. And that was great. It was terrific. Worked out very well.
Very good. All right.
And then I was working in the Radio Shack then because I knew the code from my communications technician school. And you don't learn that in a minute, so it was important in those days. So they came up to the Radio Shack and we put in a patch from our ship to Balboa in the Canal Zone. And then the Canal Zone hooked up a direct connection. I think a transmission connection to someplace in New Jersey. And then they were able to speak to their families, and they would charge the telephone cost from the Jersey thing to their home in somewhere in New York. Or New Jersey.
Very good.
Isn't that cool?
It's amazing.
They were
It's
calling
amazing.
10,000 miles away. It was cool. And, they told their wives they were okay.
Okay, so we left off with you told me who your grandparents were, and then we were talking about, we missed a little bit of the neighborhood. So what was it like growing up in Brooklyn?
Wonderful, just wonderful. It was great. We lived in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. Our biggest address, the longest lasting address, was 363 Bushwick Avenue. It was a 3-story, walk-up, 6-family house, pigeon coop on the roof. We lived on the 3rd floor, the top just below it, overlooking all the action in front of the buildings, because in those days we didn't have television. So the big thing to do was to put a pillow on your windowsill and put your elbows on the window and hang out the window and look at all the action on the street. And there was a lot of action on the street all the time. We had the trolley cars passing right in front of our building. If we looked up Moore Street, that was a noted produce center, Moore Street. So all you saw were push carts going up 3 blocks, nothing but push carts, different vendors with different items for sale and so on. It was fantastic, loaded with people all the time. And we used to get involved in playing on the roofs, on the fire escapes. at night, after all the push carts were gone, we'd go parading up that street. There were a lot of other street things that we did. We made scooters out of apple boxes. We'd take a box of apples and a 2x4 and nail them together. And then take a single roller skate with 4 wheels and separate it. And nail one end to the bottom of the 2x4 and the other end to the back. And you could actually pull a piece of rubber out of the front end so that you could steer it. So, and we put handles on the top of the boxes, put our right foot on the 2x4 and pushed off, and we had badass scooters. All over, and you could always tell we were coming because you hear the wheels, the metal wheels on the tarmac of the streets. It's wild. And of course, we formed a gang, you know. And then on the front of the apple boxes, we'd paint the symbol of, I don't know, a bird in flight or something, like a hawk's head or something like that. You know? It was really cool. Very, very good thing to do. And this was all before we got involved in playing stickball, which was like a national game in Brooklyn, you know. Only we played it just like baseball, except with a stick and a burnt tennis ball. And otherwise, all the rules were exactly the same as baseball, so it was very exciting. And we just had a great time doing that, doing these things, and all the street games that we used to come up with. Anything that you could think of could become a street game. You know, just imagine you've got maybe 5, 6 people leaning on each other from a wall, and the object is to run and jump as far forward as you can to make them topple down. That was one team against the other. That's called Johnny on a Pony. You know? And it was uproarious. It was hilarious. These street games that cost nothing. They didn't cost anything. You know, there were no centers. There were no games. There was no video. You know. So it was a simpler time. It was a lot of fun. It was a bad time too. I mean, you know. And hanging out, of course now we're growing up and we're in our early teens, and now we got to hang out. When you hang out, you have to look a certain way. It's very important. Back in those days, the look was long, flowing hair cut into a duck's ass, I think they call it a duck's ass then, and pulled forward to make it look curly and slick on the sides, you know. That was the hair. The clothing, the pants for guys were peg pants. A peg pant is enclosed around your ankle. The more enclosed it is, the more pegged it is. So you'd have a pair of pants with a 14 ankle, a 30 knee, and whatever your waist size was. And then at the top, you had to have a rise. A rise was the amount of material above the belt. So that the higher the rise, the cooler it was, you know. So you had to have a very thin belt. So a thin belt, and with these pants with the rise and pointy shoes, you had to have pointy shoes. Pointy shoes. And if the wind hit you right from behind, with a 14 peg 30, you look like Alibaba. You know, very cool. But that was a very cool thing. And of course, when we hung out in the winter, you could never zipper your jacket up. You could button your jacket. No, that was uncool. You had to have your jacket open. Even though we're standing out in the street, in the cold, trying to hang out. You were very uncool if you buttoned up your jacket. These are the dumb teenage things that we did when I was a teenager. So what could I tell you?
We talked a little bit about your dad, your interaction with your dad that didn't get recorded. Tell me again about, you talked about him picking you up at school.
Oh yeah, Yeah, my father was Joe DeLeo. My mother never prevented me from seeing him. In fact, she encouraged me to continue a relationship with him, and I did throughout my entire life. And one of my earliest memories is him coming home from World War II in uniform and picking me up at the convent where the nuns were taking care of me during the day while my mother was working. And he picked me up and at the convent and took me away in a Jeep, and I felt so proud, with the soldier. He came to see me in a Jeep. Wow, what a guy thing that is, And of course, I was a kid, and I guess under 6. I had to be under 6, under 7, So
yeah,
that's my earliest memory of him.
we talked before. You told me before about going to the movies, getting your mom to give you money for the movies.
Yeah, but it was funny, This corner, everything happened on this corner. Bushwick Avenue and Moore Street. Not only were there trolleys and the push carts, there was a gas station, a small, tiny vest pocket gas station, also right across the street. And right next to the gas station was a movie theater. It was called the Echo. And it cost a nickel to get in, and we obviously want to go on a Saturday when they had 2 features, 3 we called serials chapters,
Okay.
because at the end of each serial the hero would be almost then it was the end of the chapter. Anyway, they'd have 3 serials and 10 cartoons, all for 5 cents, and maybe they might even give you a comic, But we didn't always have the nickel, not that a nickel was such a big thing, but that was the price of stuff in those days. A nickel got you a phone call. A nickel got you on a bus or a train. That's what it was.
Yeah.
But anyway, we didn't always have the nickel, so one of us would go to the theater and make his way to the exit, bang it open. All the guys would be waiting outside to run into the dark and hide from the matron, big, heavy-set, tall woman with white hair and a white uniform. She could bodily pick you up and throw you out. But anyway, she was in charge of all this rabble that was in the theater on a Saturday, man. Now imagine a theater loaded with kids. Oh God, it's got to be horrible. Well, anyway, so they'd run in and they'd hide in the rows, and we got 5 guys in for the price of a nickel. That's what we used to do. It was fun. It was just a fun time. That didn't last too long, because the neighborhood, like all other neighborhoods, were changing, and ultimately the Echo just went out of business. They just couldn't afford to stay in business at a nickel a shot, Anyway, that's
When did Papa Tony come on the scene?
he and my mother apparently kept company when I was about, I'm guessing, 8, and they ultimately were very serious about each other and got married when I was 9. And he had a son, Philly, who was 5 years older than me. And we became a family. And it was a little uneasy at first, obviously. We were all strangers, But subsequently, it became very workable. My mother and Papa Tony were really sensitive to each other, and they worked as a team. And Philly and I always got along. We never disagreed on anything. He was 5 years older, so he was kind of protective of me. We had we obviously went in our own different ways. But that was our family, and it stayed that way until Philly came back from the Army. He was in the Army for a couple of years, in the early 50s. And he came back from the Army, and Papa Tony arranged through his family, who were all involved in the brewery workers union at Schaefer Brewery, to get Philly a job there. And a job there was great in those days, because I think they were making something like $300 a week in the early 50s. That was a lot of dough. And you had the backing of the union and so on. And Papa Tony arranged for him to do it. But he never showed up for work. He ultimately revealed he just was not capable of working at a job. You know, so we lost track of him. That was during those years. I in the meantime went away to the Navy, so I was doing my own thing then.
You know, I was driving through Queens. I don't know if I told you the story.
I'm sorry, say
I was
again?
driving through Queens, and there was a news story on, and it said there was a boarding house fire. One man died, Philip Genazzo.
That was him. That
And
was Philly.
And I happened to be driving near Grandma at the time that I heard it.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Well, that's what ultimately happened to him. He unfortunately wound up doing time for armed robbery and other criminal acts that I don't really know about. And I spoke to him after he got out of jail. By now I had come out of the Navy, and I just didn't understand why he was not working and having all these problems. But I sat with him, we spoke, I don't know, for a couple of hours, just he and I. And he just said, listen, you know, my ship is going to come in, I don't have to do any of this. It's going to happen for me, I don't want to work, I don't want to do any of that.
Yeah.
And that's it. And then he lived his life on the streets after that. It was terrible. So if he died in that boarding house fire, he was only 50 or 51.
Yeah.
He was very young. And he must have let it was such a waste. You know, he was a terrific guy. And he was not unintelligent. He was intelligent enough to have a very good life. But, you know, he had this thing, and who knows what his background brought forth in him to make him like that. But, you know, we don't know.
And I'm going to skip ahead because we talked about the Navy before. So after you got out of the Navy, what did you do?
Well, we forgot a few years of the Navy, but that's okay.
Okay, well,
no, it's all right.
Okay.
There are a few years of Navy left, but I got out and I did nothing, and I just was still as non-focused as I was before I went in, but I was now more mature to be able to find a path out of it. And so I wanted a career in art. I felt that I had the talent to do it. I had accumulated some scrapbook of work which was nowhere near enough for any professional to get a job in the art industry, let alone anywhere else. But anyway, I got into a night school program at Pratt Institute in their art program. I didn't have a car, so Nanny had to drive me. And then ultimately they allowed me to use their car. And went to Pratt Institute at night, and that's where I met your mother.
Oh, okay.
Right. And she was in a similar program, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So in starting that, I then went to an artist agency on Madison Avenue in Manhattan, and got there when it opened, and was told to take a seat, and was still sitting there when they were closing. And then a director is closing up shop, and he asks the receptionist who I am and why am I there. And she said, well, he's been waiting here all day. So he said, well, bring him in. He pulled me in, and he looked at my portfolio, and he spoke to me like a Dutch uncle. He said, look, this is not professional enough. You don't have enough training. So I recommend an art program, which got me into Pratt Institute. And secondly, he put my name on a wanted list of people who wanted to work in the art industry. And so it was like putting me on a wanted ad, you know, a worker's ad.
Waiting list.
Anyway, and I thought I'd never hear from them. You know, it was like, we'll call you. But oddly enough, I heard from them. and they sent me to Albany Street in Manhattan. Albany Street is south of where the World Trade Center is. There was no World Trade Center then. And it's 2 blocks long. And there was a shop window. And on the outside it said Sebastian Displays. I went in, and it looked like a monsoon hit the place, you know. It was a display studio where they made what went into the high-end storefront windows like Saks Fifth Avenue, Bonwood Teller, B. Altman, Lord and Taylor, even Tiffany's, Bloomingdale. Bloomingdale's otherwise known in New York as Blooming Bulls, their windows and so on. And Sebastian started me at $40 a week.
That was decent at the time. No.
That's what I was worth.
Yeah.
You know? Your mother was making $70 a week.
Oh, is that right?
So, you know, I mean, what can I tell you? But I really, really loved that job. I learned so much, and I really got involved in the work. You know, I really extended myself because I enjoyed what I was doing. You know. Anyway, I ultimately had to ask him to fire me because he just couldn't afford to pay me. He worked me up to $100 a week. I couldn't afford to support you and your mother and your sister. So I told him to fire me so that I could collect unemployment and work off the books somewhere. And he did. And I did until I saw that I could make a lot of cash just driving a cab. So I got getting a hack license in those days was really hard because it was run by the police department. And they weren't putting up with anybody's shit, you know, at all, you know. But anyway, I passed my hack license test. I got the hack license. Then suddenly, I was working all night because that's where you made your money.
Yeah.
So I do 12-hour shifts at night, sometimes a double, and make a lot of cash, you know, which was unreportable.
Yeah.
In those days, you didn't have to report anything. It was so wonderful. So I kept that for a few years until I ran into a passenger who told me her husband was hiring for his district in the Equitable Life Assurance Society. And she took my name and number and had him call me. She said to me, you know, you sound like I picked her up in Brooklyn on a radio call. I was taking her into Manhattan to the Equitable building where she was going to meet her husband. And so we had got into a conversation, you know, it's a long ride. She said, I don't understand, you know, you sound reasonably intelligent. What are you doing driving a cab? I said, well, you know, I have to support my family. You know, that's the requirement. You understood that. Anyway, so Stan Siegel called me and sold me insurance and recruited me
All right.
at the same time.
I remember Stan Siegel.
Did it 2 for 1. He was a great guy. He was a great guy. He trained us very well. We were very loyal to him. Me and your Uncle Jerry, who had come to the Equitable 6 months before. And unfortunately, he couldn't control himself and his wife, who demanded to be the biggest Jewish housewife in the world. Whenever they went to an educational conference with all of us, she'd show up with a pink poodle. And he had to walk the Franken pink. So you can imagine how he was looked upon by the Irish bigwigs in the Equitable Life organization. Anyway, that's it.
How'd you end up?
Unless you want to enter other avenues of my life. We did forget 2 years in the Navy.
Oh, tell us about that. I got
Actually, 3 years.
I got 7 minutes left.
That's all right. Save it. Oh, you always want a little extra.
All right. So how'd you end up on Rockaway Parkway?
How do I remember it?
How'd you end up there?
Nanny saw that your mother and I were married. I mean, we eloped.
Yeah.
And nobody knew about it at all. And she wanted to give us a good start, so she helped us buy that house at 624 Rockaway Parkway, directly across the street from the hospital, I think it was Bethel Hospital, where you were born.
Hmm.
You were born, in fact, you were born there, I think the first year we moved there. So you were the veteran.
There you go. Yeah, you can still look up on Google Maps. You can look up that address, and you can see the old building.
624, it was 4 houses off the corner.
Yeah.
And it was very unusual for anyone from my old neighborhood to live in a house like that.
Yeah.
You know, it was a two-family house with a walk-in apartment on the ground floor. Whoever had that?
Yeah.
We never had that. We came from multi-person dwellings.
Yeah.
You know.
I got 6 minutes left, Kat. You need something?
Yeah, tell him the story about how everybody got to go in and see Bart when he was born. All the guys.
Not Bart. Andrea.
Oh, it was Andrea? Okay.
Your sister was born. Now me and Stan Siegel, my boss, and Jerry DeAngelis, your Uncle Jerry, are all coming from Manhattan. I want to see my daughter. And they want to see my daughter. and it's in a tiny little hospital on, I think it was Eastern Parkway, but I'm not absolutely sure. So we go to that. We come back from Manhattan, all in the same car. We're all in suits. We look like dynamite. We walk into the hospital, and we say we want to see you. And they say, "Oh no. Only the father can see the newborn." So we all said, "But we're all the father." And she let us all in. That's all in there. It was really, that was funny. That was very funny. But anyway, your birth was very dramatic for me because obviously it was the first one. I spent a lot of time in a waiting room over at Bethel Hospital waiting for you,
Yeah.
you know. And I was with some other guys, you know, whatever. And we did the typical, you could have filmed it for any birth done in the entire 20th century. You know, we're walking the floor, we're talking to each other. How many you have? How long you've been married? Blah, 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 blah. All that baloney. So it was, hey, that's what you do. You know?
Yeah.
That's what manly men do. That's the story. Can I take a break now?
How long? We got 4 minutes left.
Ah, man, come on. Give me a break.
I want to use up what I got. So.
But what else you want?
So, how long were you in Brooklyn for? In the Brockway Parkway house?
Not very many years. All the neighborhoods were changing. We moved down in '67, so we were there for 5 years.
What was your first car there? Remember
Well, I had a '61 Plymouth Fury. It was white, real zoomy doomy car, a wonderful car, but it was totally unsuited for work. So I was introduced slowly but surely into the foreign car genre, and I wound up buying I traded in the Plymouth Fury, wretched excess, and I wound up buying a 1965 Renault R8 for $1,750, and it had 4 seats and 4 doors, and the seats were knockoffs of Mercedes-Benz car seats, for which Mercedes-Benz had been suing Renault for years. The seats were overstuffed, tuck and roll seats. And it really something. And you and Andrea were brought up in the back seat, and I had when you were little, we had a crib back. A crib fit perfectly in the back seat.
Is that right?
Yeah, the both of you were in. It was really funny. It was great. 65 Renault, rear engine car.
What happened to that car?
I sold it for $200.
Okay.
To a friend.
Okay. Where? What about the Alfa Romeo? Where did that come in?
That was funny. The Alpha came right in. In fact, right in there. In 1967, I saw an ad in the Times, in the car section. I always read the car section for a brand new 1966 Alfa Romeo Giulia Spider. That's the convertible for $2,600. I'm sorry, $2,800. That or a Sunbeam Alpine convertible. So I'm talking to Jerry. I said, "Gee, he said, what are you, crazy? Get the Alpha. Forget the Sunbeam. The Alpha." So I got the Alpha, and it was wonderful and frightening at the same time because nobody knew how to work on an Italian car. I mean, nobody. And I had a mechanic that Jerry knew that was just willing to read the manual. If they were willing to read the manual, then they could work on the car. But most of these guys were from the hip mechanics. They didn't know shit from Shinola about anything exotic. But this one guy, Vinny, was willing to read it. But still, you had to really be an exotic car mechanic to really appreciate what this was. This is a double overhead cam engine. It had a rigid rear axle, never had independent, but it was dynamite. And it had huge finned aluminum drums. Finned aluminum, man. I mean, think about this. It was just incredible.
I remember sitting on the spare tire in the back.
That's right. Spare tire was right behind this. It was only two-seater, right? And you used to sit right here, right on that. Right on that. It was fun. You loved it.
I'm sure.
But
all right, we're running out of time.
okay,
So we'll continue this next time I come back.
to be continued.
Yes. Okay.
At whatever juncture. We may visit you for the next session.
Oh yeah, that would be good.
I
Okay.
want to come out and see you in your natural environment.